what does it take to win as a foreigner in China?
This is probably one of the most complicated questions that you could ask someone in this market. I looked at all the people I know that are successful, that are foreigners. I would say the most important thing is that
Josh Gardner, CEO of Kung Fu Data, over $1 billion of revenue generated and licensed distributor for lifestyle, street fashion, and performance brands in China.
the one thing that can't be copied in this country is you can get an unfair advantage here almost any way. And it doesn't matter if you're coming into China as a foreigner or taking stuff out. You have to think this way. Coming into China, that's the playbook. China is a place of many choices and none. One of my really close friends have a huge business. And he was running it in China. They had 400 offices, 14,000 employees. He said, you know what I've realized after 5 years here? China's really big. In my world, it's really small. Foreigners coming in here don't realize how big China really is. I had a friend who was struggling getting funding. I'm like, how many investors did you meet? He's like, I met 3 this week. And I'm like, I took my phone and I opened up my calendar and I showed him 1 week. And there were like 25 meetings, dinners, events. So that's the kind of intensity I mean. And you cannot stop.
Quickly before the episode starts, we've noticed that 83% of you are not yet subscribed. If you find this podcast interesting and would like to support us, please subscribe and we'll make sure to deliver the best guests and best content possible. Thank you very much. Enjoy the episode. Josh, what does it take to win as a foreigner in China?
This is probably one of the most complicated questions, all right, that you can ask someone in this market. But if I looked at the last few decades of my life, living mostly in China and a little bit out, and I looked at all the people I know that are successful, that are foreigners, I would say, barring exceptional ability, the most important thing is an unfair advantage, all right? And, you know, you can get an unfair advantage many, many ways. I always tell people there's 3 easy ways to do that, right? You can control a commodity. So let's say, your family owns all the land that produces a rare kind of ginseng, and it's regulated by the government, and it's only in this one place in the US, and you own 70% of it. And the only people on this earth that actually consume that ginseng are in China. Why? Because it's a medicine, right? Traditional Chinese medicine. That is actually one of my old clients. So he comes to China. He's like, here's my dilemma. I control 65% of this. I've had this land in my family for like 100 years, and we create this ginseng. It's a special species. And so the government in the U.S. protects it. It can only be grown in this one state, Wisconsin. And I'll never forget, the guy's in here, and he's like, but we're so tired of all our clients in China. They've created brands out of it. They take my raw material, and I do this. And I'm like, have you ever built a brand? Right? You ever do retail, right? Or packaging or anything like that? And he's like, no, not really. I said, look, you control the entire global market on a rare commodity. If you're unhappy with what you make, raise your price. Because, the rest of it sounds like ego to me. It sounds like hubris. I mean, you have these great Chinese clients who are actually doing all the work, all the hard work for you. You get to control how much money you make on that commodity forever. So that's one example of an unfair advantage. Another is technology. We all know this, which is why, a lot of technology outside China is not welcome here. It's either copied or they need access to it or it's banned, right? Altogether, because it's something that is quite defendable, IP, depending on how it's built. And you can see that with Chinese tech now, right? Like Douyin is deep and defendable, right? There's nothing in the West like it, right? It really is unique, okay? And I would say the same about Red and many other tech firms in China. So I think you have this technology or IP that you control. But the simplest one for, I think, someone coming in here as a foreigner is to control brand, right? You own a name that represents heritage and time and history and success outside China. And that is the easiest way to spell success here. You know why? Because the one thing that you cannot be copied, the one thing that can't be copied in this country is time. You can't. You can't replace time. So if you've built a brand outside China and you own that brand equity, it cannot be copied here. But people can copy your products, right? And try to resell fake products. But they actually can't take your brand away from you, right? And I think people don't see that. And that's just 3 examples of what I would consider an unfair advantage. There are many other. You have relationships that no one else has. That's how I started. Okay, so back in the day, And this is not even to bring business into China. So I'm going out. So this is 20 years ago. I found a category that was really underrepresented in the US at the time. And it was the ability to make a type of glass that would not break if you poured food or wax, like a candle, like you made the hot or cold, and you go through a packing process. It's called borosilicate, right? And I realized that there was an opportunity here. So I went to China and I sourced, and I was able to create an unfair advantage. And what did I do? Well, I screwed up the first 2 years, buying from shitty factories. But that's the truth. It was really rough. And then I eventually realized something, that there were people in Guangdong province, so the Cantonese background, and also Taiwanese in Fujian and Guangdong, that were the best glass makers in the world of a specific type of glass, borosilicate. And you could only get the material in some place in Sichuan. And so I figured out what the material was, and then I used my connections to find out who they supplied with that raw material. And then I went and met those factory owners through more connections, and eventually was able to drink enough, party enough with these guys that they would trust me, and they gave me a piece of their production line. And that was the day that I was able to build a brand that was absolutely unbeatable in quality and price. So you can get an unfair advantage here almost any way. And it doesn't matter if you're coming into China as a foreigner or taking stuff out. You have to think this way. You have to think from, is my position when I launch defendable in some way? Because one thing is for sure in China, the second you are successful, there's going to be 50 million people the next day. And there are stories about people who go to the Guangzhou fair and they would put out a new product collection. And literally 48 hours later, 50 other booths have the exact same product sitting there the next day, right? So then no one shows what they're going to do anymore, right? They have it hidden under the table, like, let me show you the new stuff, right? I think coming into China, that's the playbook. And obviously there are many other ways to be successful here and win, but I think that's a surefire way. Do you control something or own something or have something that no one else has? That's like an anchor. It's a position that is defendable and that you can scale from that point. And it can also be just popularity, right? As an asset, right? So let's say you're a huge influencer outside China. You can absolutely move your brands in here. Like Rihanna is such a superstar, and she's beloved here, right? And so Fenty Beauty took off right away, right? Her house brand, just boom. Okay, so I think there's not really much limit, but that unfair advantage thing, I think, is mostly neglected by foreigners coming in. They think they have something special, but they don't do even basic desktop research, right? So I had a client who's a potential client, and we had to turn him down. So they're number one in a category no one cares about, right? This like personal home fitness. They have a bunch of brands, yoga mats, and all this kind of stuff. Product's beautiful. It's all made in China. Stuff looks like a Taobao brand, right? So I see these kind of companies all the time. There's nothing like, maybe you use performance marketing, built a brand on Amazon, whatever. That is not competitive enough here. There's like a Xiaomi out there or a Huawei that's going to replicate you, and their brand is so strong, they're just going to roll you over, right? You may do okay, but very likely not. So we had some clients that even owned a category globally, but their products, it just, the brand wasn't that important to the consumer. So a great example is TRX. So we thought we had a real winner here. So their trademark, they owned it properly in China. Okay? By the way, absolutely register your trademarks properly. I mean, and you need the nickname in Chinese, you need it all, or just don't launch here. Anyway, they did this properly, which I can't say for most people, but they actually did it right. They owned the Chinese, the English, I mean, all through and through. And basically in China at the time, this was like 10 years ago, 8 years ago, something, the letters TRX and the equivalent Chinese nickname, whatever, it basically meant a category. It was like Xerox or FedEx or Google. So all the traffic in an entire category online was going to the letters that they had the right to. Okay. And even with that, we couldn't win because it was because those bands that they sell, the iconic bands, you could buy them for $10, right? You could go to Decathlon and get the ripoff for $8, US, I'm saying, right? Or 8 pounds, right? And they were selling for 100 pounds, right? And that differential doesn't work when you're not a luxury brand, where you haven't created fashion and desirability and lifestyle, right, around your brand. If your brand is a practical solution-based item, right, if that's what you mean, it's not a bad thing. It's just understand in China, they just may not see that much value in a brand equity in that category. So you need not just a brand, but a brand that has and is desired in a way that gives you leverage and an unfair advantage in this market. And you could almost say the entire market is based on leverage, power curve here, how to make money.
And we discussed this before the pod, is finding that middle range, fast fashion. It could be menswear. So I think that would be an interesting one to explore, right, in China. A lot of people think, oh, there's shirts, there's shoes, everyone's doing it. But actually, to find that middle range that's somewhere in between H&M, but also a high-end brand.
So looking at category, right, everyone's like, what business do you launch? Okay. Well, first of all, you got to be focused. Okay. I think that is very important. But there are very specific things. You know, we started as a data company before we went into distribution and took the risk, right? And even back then, we always made decisions the same way, right? And I think what people fail to realize is that while this market is crowded, I heard this, oh my God, I can't remember who the CEO was of a foreign company here, but he said it so well. He's like, China is I want to get the words right, but it was something along the lines of, it's a place of many choices and none. Okay? And what he meant by that was, you go in and you look at what's available in a category, right? It seems like there's endless competition, but actually when it comes down to something you would buy, there's very few options. Like, oh, that's what he said. There's so many choices, but actually very few options, right? So there's thousands of listings, but you're really only going to consider 3, right? And if you apply that logic to categories in China, you will see opportunity everywhere. I just mentioned that thing on fashion because it's an example of a category. It's a 1 trillion or 1.2 trillion RMB category. It's massive. And it's to assume that there's no space for foreign brands in the market, and like a lot of them left. Well, why'd they leave? Well, maybe it was for other reasons. Who knows? But if the way we look at it, there's space in every category for a foreign brand, right? As an example, or a foreign product or something like this. For the most part, there's space. Okay, you just have to have an unfair advantage coming in, and I think you can find those niche opportunities even now. Like 5 years ago, the categories I was selling are not at all the categories I'm selling now. And we switched 5 years. We saw that. We're like, oh, this is not the way things are moving. Like, I used to do corporate accounts, and they're huge. They're very difficult for a small company to manage. Like we ran Beats by Dre, for example, for a while. I mean, they were eating us alive. And I was like, maybe we should try mid-sized brands, right? Maybe we should do some of these D2C brands. And this is like 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And everyone on my team is like, no, forget it. Let's just keep in. We had like Bayer and Johnson & Johnson, like all these big brands. And I'm like, yeah, but they're not the future, right? Like the newer people and the new kids, they're not really that interested. And I think it would be easier for our team to manage a mid-sized brand. They see value in us. They like us. We're a good fit for them. I said, we'll just do that. And so out of dumb luck, like within 2 years, no one wants the old corporate, what my dad buys and my mom, they want all this new stuff. So I feel like that happens in China so quickly. Every year is so different. You have to follow those patterns. You must. So the best way to be a success here as a foreigner is to be really good at fishing. Just like you think you go out and you're going to go in the ocean. And instead of like a lake, right? China's not a little pond, right? Where you can see everything and figure out where all the fish are going to be. It's a really big ocean, right? And a lot of it doesn't have anything in it for you, right? It's a red ocean, or they just don't bite what you sell. So you really need to be good at, getting around, finding the fish, and most important, knowing that what they're eating now and where they're eating isn't going to be the same next year. It's just not. That's my personal experience. And so people get caught because they have a period of time where they're selling something or doing something in China, and they just don't adjust quick enough to that change. But to me, that school of fish is always moving. So like if you were in this position in a category, whatever it is, and you're doing this, like very likely 5 years later, you're not doing any of that if you're doing well, right? And to give you some data, we had to make that switch like 5 years ago, 4 years ago. So yeah, 5 years ago or 6. Within 2 years, our business started doing well. Then COVID hit, and I'm like, oh, I'm dead, right? Then we're all screwed. Actually, we had the exact opposite. We grew in revenue 9x, and we grew 11x in profit over that 4-year period. So that was, to me, from 2019 until now, we actually had a pretty good outcome. And I think it was because we've become really good at fishing. I think if you just think that way, put your fishing hat on, maybe the bait I have isn't what they're biting on today. Like, you don't see a fisherman sit there and keep using the same bait if they don't get a bite. But most people do when they come to China, and they blame China. Not getting any bites. Well, did you try any new bait? Right? Have you moved spots? Why are you still there? All the fish are over here, right? And if you talk to other fishermen who are good, they're always telling you where to go, right? Because, I'm catching. You're not trying to catch the same fish, right? So I think, those two things, having an unfair advantage and then knowing how to use it, right? And I think that's really the important thing. And finding opportunities, I think one of my really close friends, his family, they have a huge business. And he was running it in China. They had 400 offices, 14,000 employees. Okay, big marketing company, big field marketing. And, after 5 years in China, running this massive ship, and he was leaving, and he had a saying. He said, and he was saying in his talk, and I love this. It's very simple. It's like, what I've realized after 5 years here, and this is a guy and this is the global number one in their field. He's like, China's really big. In my world, it's really small, right? And that kind of sums it up. I think foreigners coming in here don't realize how big China really is, like how big the market is. Like Shanghai, this city, has 26 million people. It's like most of the population of Canada and Australia, right? And a lot of European countries, it's more, right? I mean, just one city. It's a big, big place. And I think most people kind of get stuck in tier one economy. Like, I'm only going to sell in I'm going after a certain consumer. They live in this city, they're more modern, da-da-da-da. But actually, I think there's really much bigger opportunities outside, right? If you're willing to go deeper and deeper in. And I think there's layers, like how far down the rabbit hole are you willing to do, right? And some of us who've been here long wish we took the blue pill, right? We do, we've been in it too long. So I think those two analogies, learn to fish, and when you come in here, have an unfair advantage. And I think you could do pretty well. So we've changed our categories, and even this year, I've already shifted again. Saw the change, fish moved away, saw some softness in our luxury clients that we're selling, and realized, okay, in exceptional cases, that's going to go well, but the move is down here. So we just shifted, and now the opportunities coming in they're better than the ones we had. And like I said, there's very wide open spaces. So I would say, see if you can not try to sell the whole ocean. So you can't navigate the whole ocean. Find a part of it that's got calmer seas, right? Find a spot you can be and be happy with and focus, and that has potential. And I think you'll do well here. There's so much. I mean, you could argue like young guy like you. Right now, I see so many opportunities, okay? And the biggest single one is that the entire executive class of foreigner with family is not here. Like, it's down 90%, let's say, that population. The under 30 is way up, and guys like me who can never leave, like trapped here forever, because we're not good at anything else. There's us, there's like the old people, right, that are, have business here for a long time. And then there's the under 30. My God, like the amount of opportunities sitting just on this table, I see it in every field. Like, I have friends in so many different business categories here, and some of them are suffering, right? Like, education was miserable until this year. For the last 4 years, even F&B hospitality has been really, iffy, right? Or inconsistent, and lots of issues there. But a lot of people are doing, just well, because the ships have already happened. And so I think, you just need to get on the good side of that.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I want to touch on a point regarding the partying side and the hustle of doing business in China. So the old you would have done the KTVs, drinking, partying. There is another option, isn't there, in China, that you can be more maybe a bit more civilized and broker deals that way.
Okay, I have two sides of this. So when I was younger, I feel like there is a cultural obligation, especially if you're a male, to participate in some of that. It's kind of like vetting, right? If you're going to join a fraternity, right, or a club, they might put you through a little bit of hazing, just a little bit. I feel like that is kind of you par for the course in China. And what I had to do here 25 years ago to get things done when I was really young, and what I have to do now, very different. Okay, very different. And then China's changed. So I think in general, there's more of a focus on health. And I think as a Laoban, you could actually get away with being more reasonable. Like I'm actually quite strict now, especially with my own personal health. I feel like there's a moment in your life here when you can actually say, oh, you know what, I'm not going to do that. But I think when you're young here, I don't think it's a bad thing to have those experiences and to be respectful of elders or whatever. I'm very respectful of Chinese culture and the DNA of success in interpersonal relationships here. I feel like you can master that as a foreigner. That's more valuable than finding any opportunity. Because if you just master the DNA of relationships and decode how to get to things and get leverage, that is an unfair advantage. One of the biggest ones you can have as a foreigner here, because you're the gateway. Like foreigners not here, you need to go through someone unless they want to come in and go deep, right? So I feel like there's a big opportunity there for people to just jump in and go all in, right? Like, yeah, it's a risk, go to war. I mean, but you could say that at any time, right? When I was here in the 90s, I was living in Beijing when America bombed the Belgrade Embassy. And you saw Xi Jinping just went to Europe to memorialize. Let's not forget, I was there when they were burning the embassy in Chengdu when you couldn't be American in Beijing for like 6 months. I was Canadian. That was fun, right? You didn't get a cab. Like no one picked you up. And they were like trashing all symbols of America. So every retail place, restaurant, and there was so much hostility. So there were like riots, right? I lived there then. Like to me, what's going on now is there's no tanks yet, right? I don't see any of that. Like to me, China in the 90s there was way more opportunity if you went from like what hasn't been built yet. But at the same time, it was very different. And, compared to now, like I look at China now, it's like, wow, this market is hundreds of times bigger than when I was here in the 90s, like when I was a young man. And then on top of the market being so big, it's mature. And like, there's so much infrastructure that wasn't here. So like, to me, the opportunity is, look, if you're going to go long on China like me, this is probably the best time. Most people left. There's a huge gap in communication. The world is changing. There's no more integration. And now everyone's going into corners, right? And that happened during COVID. And you notice like a lot of my friends who are, they own trading companies or whatever. All of us middlemen, right, did so well during COVID.
Oh, I did.
Oh, I did super well, right? Like because the power went back to the person in the middle, right? So don't assume that these changes are actually bad for you as an individual or you as a business owner or a brand coming in. The fact that the world is divided on China, the fact that there's all these issues means you just have that much less competition, right? There's more blue ocean now. There were categories that were so crowded and now not crowded, right? Like wide open again, right? That blows my mind. Like categories that used to be super crowded are now pretty open.
What categories would they be?
I think because we look at it, I mean, a lot of fashion categories are open, but that's just stuff I'm looking at. But some of my friends are in other businesses like software. Like it's a massive blue ocean, like B2B software. Like you would think it's not, but it's so big, right? I don't know. It's easy. They struggle, but I mean, it is literally a blue ocean. I mean, it's billions of dollars of blue ocean, and I don't know who's going to do it, right? I think the trending stuff is probably not where you want to be, unless you're super connected, right? I think there's opportunity everywhere right now. So a lot of people are just following what the government wants, and I think that's fine. Line up with government initiative. You can't go against the government, and you want to be in parallel. So where they're investing, it's usually a good place to be to make money. So I think that is one surefire way you can follow the money. The other is to look at places where there is a gap, right? And it's caused because of all the changes the last 5 years, and just go in there, or even a place that's just totally underrepresented. And I think those are the, to me, more useful actions you can take in terms of analyzing opportunity in the market.
That sounds like a bit of a contradiction, though, to position the company to be aligned with the government. But if you've got a great product or service that is slightly against that, isn't that a risk?
I think for sure, right? But everything in China is risky. What business isn't risky?
Oh, this is risky. It's podcast.
This is risky. What business isn't risky in China, right? I mean, I've had many here. I've had 7. What businesses? Right? I would say that. And I think you can follow the government money and make money doing that. That is a lot of my friends who are, very connected in the Chinese government, or that is the business they run, right? They're in Guozi. You know what Guozi is, right? Or like they have their own, right? And it's, or they're Ardai, or something like this. And that's how they make all of it.
Just to translate that for the audience, Guozi.
So Guozi is like a pseudo public-private company. So it's like former government officials, and they get state funds, and they set up a private company because the government can't trade. We work with some of them, right? And I think, there's just individuals from certain families or backgrounds that have those advantages, and that is the business they're in, right? And that's a very viable business. And like, if you live in Beijing as a foreigner, you're more likely doing government contracts, right? If you're successful, that's your business. That's what I meant by that. I didn't mean like but I'm saying you don't just have to do that. Like, I'm going to go into AI or EV or, electric vehicles or whatever, because that's where the government's putting the money. Okay. I'm not in any of those categories, and the government's putting nothing into my space. And, my team's like, wow, this is like, we've never seen an opportunity like this in 5-10 years. And I would say that. I think there's definitely geopolitical risk, but other than that, like the risk of geopolitics spilling into business and disrupting it, other than that type of disruption, I don't really see much risk. Other than the usual, like, don't come to China if you don't have a competitive advantage and you have leverage and you're prepared for the long haul and for all the crazy stuff that's going to happen, right? But if you have all that in place, then I think it's a great place to come. I mean, I'm not saying you do it. Like, if you don't want to do it or you don't have the skills, then be humble, right? I think humility and respect and an open mind gets you so much farther here than anything else, right? Like, if you're arrogant, like you're coming in, I mean, and there are cases of people that come in with their, bulldog their way into China to make money, but it's so rare. You think about it, like, there's like a graveyard out here of foreigners that came in, right? Of businesses that came in thinking they could do stuff or change China, and just, well, wow. And there's a reason for that. Like, this is not, Bath, England. This is not, an outpost of the Roman Empire, right? People, you have to think of it a different way. You have the rest of the world is revolving around a sun, right? It has planets, okay? And the gravity works a certain way. China's in its own universe. It has its own sun, and gravity works different, right? And it's really big, that galaxy, and really powerful. And you probably, no matter how big your planet is and you're coming in, you may find that you don't have the gravity that you do in your own market or outside China. And I feel like that's where the humility has to come in. And even we, as long as we've been in the game, always have an open mind, right? Always humble, right? Like, we never know what's going to happen, right? I've watched things like this for a very long time. Does that make sense? Like, that stuff is, I think, you've been here long enough, 10 years, you know what I'm talking about. Waves, up, down, left, right.
I think the easiest win right now, especially if you're a foreigner, is just boots on the ground. The amount of brands I've had in the last year or two approach me, the fact that I'm just here,
that's it,
in Shanghai, is just such an easy win.
It's easy, and it's going to stay that way for the interim period, because I don't think, like, top level executives and their families are going to be moving back anytime soon. So the middle management infrastructure that used to consume all that opportunity is not here, right? They're not moving back yet, right? And I think like that, to me, that's such a big opportunity. Like boots on the ground is probably the biggest opportunity right now for anyone. And what you do when you get here, you figure it out when you get here. What are you going to specialize in? Why don't you figure out something that you're like, oh, wow, all those people left. Oh, wait, there's no one doing this. That's kind of how all my friends think, you know, that have been here a long time and have done well. That's how they think. It's not that they're not focused. It's that you may have to try a lot more. Better way to look at it. China is extremely operationally intense. If you don't apply a certain level of intensity like you would at a super well-funded hot tech startup in, you know, anywhere else in the world, that for any business in China, you have to run it that way. But you will not be successful. You will find it's really hard. So someone on your team has to be that way. If you're not, find a partner. Success is spelled we, not me, my, mine, I. I don't find the most successful people do it that way. Like I'm a product of a large group of people that work with me. And I think that's something to consider, right? Maybe that's the humility side, right? And the intensity side is very important here. So I had a friend very close friend, who was bitching when I was bringing him into an organization that we were in together. And he was saying he was struggling getting funding. And I was like, okay, so tell me about that. And he's like, yeah, you know, meeting all these investors and, you know, we're just not getting the term sheet or the offer. And he was in this really cool type of what used to be called predictive analytics. And now they call it AI. But you know, it used to be just algorithms that helped, you know, make decisions, right? There's cool stuff, but not real AI. Anyway, he was going into this and had a great team. This was like 9-10 years ago, something like that, 8, 9, 10. And I'll never forget this conversation. And he's practically in tears, like complaining about it. And then I'm like, oh, well, you know, how many investors did you meet? And you asked me about, like, do you have to go out and do that FaceTime? Do you have to go and drink and eat and do this, right? Let me put this in perspective. So I said, how many did you meet? He's like, I met 3 this week. And I said, oh, okay. And then I looked up on my phone, like, how many licks does it take to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop, right? How many meetings you have to get one offer, right, for financing or whatever? And it turned out you need to meet like every 100 people you meet, you might get 1 to 2, maybe 3 offers. And he's at 3. And I'm like, I took my phone and I opened up my calendar and I showed him 1 week. And there were like 25 meetings, dinners, events, right? I'm like, it will take you at the rate you're going literally 10 months to do what I did this week in meetings. So that's the kind of intensity I mean. And you cannot stop. So if you can't do it, then you need a team that's going to do that. And I think if you're not in a full contact, it's like being on the field. It's like war, right? You're in it to win it. And if you're not doing that, someone on your team is doing it. Or you will not have the kind of leverage and momentum you need to overcome all the other stuff that works against you here, the friction.
That's why I was really diligent with getting you on the podcast. I was, you know, really stuck at it. And
yeah, it's hard to book me, right?
Yeah, it is. It's very hard. Yeah.
When I'm here, it's like I flew in on a red eye this morning.
Yeah.
I had meetings all morning. I had to take a quick nap before I came to see you. I'm like, all right, power nap, shower, ready to go on a podcast, right? But that's kind of the momentum, right? So after this, 2 more meetings, a dinner. That's the sort of pace and intensity I feel you need as Porter here to be successful. You almost have to work twice as hard in a weird way.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Josh. Really enjoyed it, and it's been a golden half an hour, so I really appreciate your time.
You're very welcome. I hope it was useful.
Like, subscribe. See you next time, guys.
Take care.